today I'm going to talk to you about the differences between Jordan Peterson and Joseph Campbell. Now, Peterson has been found on several occasions being slightly critical towards Campbell for his saying, "follow your bliss," and generally thinks that he failed to integrate the deeper aspects of individuation, which include picking up your burden, being in your struggle, taking personal responsibility. It's not just following your bliss, Peterson says.
Is there a way to find your true passion, or is that just a cliche? Well, it's definitely a cliche, and it's the sort of thing that actually annoys me quite a lot about New Age thinkers, and I would more or less put Joseph Campbell in that category.
Now, I think this is an interesting divide here, because what did Campbell actually mean by follow your bliss? Well, in order to figure this out, let's take a look at some of the things that he says.
The realization of your bliss, your true being, comes when you have put aside the what might be called passing moment, with its terror and with its temptations and its statement of requirements of life, that you should live this way.
What Campbell's addressing here is that when one initially finds a purpose that they're passionate about, they wish to follow, there's always going to be the temptation or the backlash from society, from others in our life, from belief structures that is not going to want us to fulfill this path. And so we have to learn how to put those fears aside and face our passion anyway, and continue to move forward in the right direction.
What is that story about, and I forget where it comes from, about the camel and then the lion, and along the way you lose the burden of youth?
The three transformations of the spirit.
Yeah.
That's Nietzsche. That's the prologue to Thus Spake Zarathustra.
Tell me that story.
When you are a child, when you are young and a young person, you are a camel. The camel gets down on its knees and says, "Put a load on me." This is obedience. This is receiving the instruction and information that your society knows you must have in order to live a competent life.
This is a really important part to pause on. Peterson often talks about if you don't get a young child civilized and socialized by the time they're around 4 years old, you're in trouble. And so this is an important aspect of our lives. We need to figure out how to function within a society. We need to learn how to follow the rules, learn how to show up, learn how to function within a group unit. And that is a fundamental stage of development that human beings typically have to go through. Now, what's interesting is that this is only the first step, because if you stop here, then you spend your whole life being directed by society. You never really follow your own inner compass. You never really follow your own guidance. You spend your whole life living out other people's expectations, and you never listen to any sort of deeper calling. So if you stop here, you're living a society-directed life rather than what I like to call a soul-directed life, or an individuated life. So let's go into the next step. And yes, I know we're taking a little detour here, but it's all going to come back around. You're going to see how this adds into the differences between Campbell and Peterson.
When the camel is well loaded, he gets up on his feet, struggles to his feet, and runs out into the desert, where he becomes transformed into a lion. The heavier the load, the more powerful the lion. The function of the lion is to kill a dragon, and the name of the dragon is "Thou shalt." And on every scale of the dragon there is a "Thou shalt" imprinted. Some of it comes from 2,000 years, 4,000 years ago. Some of it comes from yesterday morning's newspaper headline.
Now we are starting to come to some of the major differences between Peterson and Campbell. Why is that? Well, one of Peterson's major criticisms of Nietzsche is that you can't just slay the dragon of society and walk away. You have to see that there's this a priori framework, this Judeo-Christian ethic that we have inherited, at least in Western culture, that is a deep part of our being, and that we must figure out how to live into this in a way that has some integrity. And we have these codes, we have these rules, we have these moral impulses and intuitions, not because of just society, but because they're deeply embedded within us over thousands of years of evolution in which we have tried to find a way of living that we can pass down. Now, Campbell is aligning more with this idea of, well, no, you can't just swallow what we call in Gestalt therapy an introject, a message from outside that comes in and starts renting space in our head. No, you can't just swallow these ideas. You have to slay that dragon, and you have to become independent from them and decide for yourself what it is that you believe. You may end up aligning with these things on your own accord, but you're not doing it just because somebody else told you it was the right thing to do. You're doing it because it's coming from this deeper place of wisdom and intuition within you, not being imposed from outside or from some sort of lineage that's being passed down to you. You're just inheriting this baggage. So you're getting rid of the introject and you're becoming more individuated. So the next piece after you slay the dragon is,
when the dragon is killed, the lion is transformed into a child, an innocent child living out of its own dynamic. And Nietzsche uses the term ein aus sich rollendes Rad, a wheel rolling out of its own center. That's what you become. That is the mature individual. The thou shalt is a civilizing force. It turns a human animal into a civilized human being. But then the one who is thrown off the thou shalt is still a civilized human being. You see, he has been humanized, you might say, by the thou shalt system. So his performance now as a child is not simply childlike at all. He has assimilated the culture and thrown it off as a thou shalt. But this is the way in any artwork. You go to work and study an art. You study the techniques. You study all the rules. And the rules are put upon you by a teacher. Then there comes a time of using the rules, not being used by them. Do you understand what I'm saying? So one way is to follow. I always tell my students, follow your bliss.
Follow your bliss?
Your bliss, where the deep sense of being in form and going where your body and the soul want to go. When you have that feeling, then stay with it and don't let anyone throw you off.
What the hell does he mean by this child that just generates on its own? We can't just live our lives like children. We have to do our chores, pay our bills, show up for work. We have to take care of family. There's so many things that we have to do as adults that children can't do, right? Well, it's a lot more nuanced than that. Let's take a look at what my mentor in psychology, Dr. Roger Strachan, has to say about the child.
Little boy, let me talk to you. You have a right to be treated with courtesy and respect and dignity. You have a right to become. You are the father of the man. Do you understand that?
Explain it again.
Every major philosopher, every major theologian, Jesus Christ said, unless you become as a little child, you cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven. That naivete, that sweetness, that openness, that ability to change and grow and become. The little boy is the father of the man.
Wow, that's profound.
We recognize that in our developmental process, there is this element of becoming, and it doesn't stop. So the same things that the little boy needs, the adult needs. But if the little boy doesn't get those, he gets arrested.
Here we begin to realize the importance of that young boy or young girl within us. If we lose touch with that side of us and only follow things based on the direction of others in society, we truly have no deep inner connection with life. We are just kind of floating around following the herd. This is what Campbell is talking about. Follow your own path. Now, let's be fair to Peterson's criticism. As you all probably know, I'm a big fan of Peterson. I think he is emphasizing a point that is important, that one cannot simply live by that dictum alone. You have to integrate a sense of personal responsibility in order to survive by the simple fact that Mother Nature, is constantly forcing us to work hard to continue to maintain a society or a system in which we can exist. And so these are important distinctions to make. However, let's now come back to Campbell and be fair to him. He has a wonderful quote that even says, "It is by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure." Now, Peterson often quotes Jung in an old alchemical saying, which is, "In filth it will be found," or "that which you most need is where you least want to look." Excuse me, I think that's how you say it. Jung wrote about this, and Peterson talks about this often in his lectures, and he uses the Knights of the Round Table as an example. When they are on the quest for the Holy Grail, they have to go to the places on the map that are the most dark. They have to look where they least want to, the scariest places, to find what they most need.
Carl Jung, who we'll discuss in detail, said his primary dictum was "Insterquilinus invenitur," which I'm sure I'm massacring because it's Latin, but it meant "in filth it will be found." And one of the hallmarks of the clinical theories is that within the confines of everyone's experience, and you can think about this as experience out in the world or experience in the unconscious mind, there are dirty little secrets, let's say, and skeletons and dreadful old fears and remnants of abuse and memories of pathological behavior and failures of courage that leave you undeveloped, perhaps out of avoidance, and that the psychoanalytic process is precisely the careful encounter with those forgotten and repressed elements of the self, in the hope that a clear encounter will redeem them, unite them with the remainder of your personality, and make you stronger in consequence.
Ultimately, what I find here between Peterson and Campbell is that there might be a little bit of a misunderstanding. Now, I don't know how much of Campbell Peterson has read, and it's quite possible that he's come to a very educated conclusion about Campbell's work. But it should be noted that Campbell spent an average of 7 to 8 hours a day reading. He was a highly respected teacher, and he did some great work on mythology, and it's really a shame that a lot of the population has discounted his work because it didn't fit into the mainstream academia. What a lifetime of reading and educating himself to be wasted without really seeing the value in everything that he learned and shared with us. So I would be in favor here of re-encountering Campbell from the perspective of maybe he has something to offer, and maybe a lot of us have put him to the side without the proper analysis before we form our opinion. So in summary, I think that they have more in common than they do different, ultimately. I mean, if you really look at what they're both saying, they have a different edge to them. Campbell, of course, is more inclined to that positive enlightenment view of life. He was very interested in Eastern tradition. Peterson is a little more grim and likes to bring things down to reality and the limitations and the difficulties and suffering. So they kind of attack this whole issue of psychology and meaning from a different angle, but ultimately they are not necessarily contradicting each other absolutely. I also think that ultimately there is a difference in how they treat society. Peterson looks at society as the father which we must learn to deal with. If you read Maps of Meaning, you will see that he often draws parallels between society and the archetype of the father, while Campbell looks at society as, yes, while we do need this guy around, it's not ultimately the most important thing. Ultimately, what's most important is that passion. So maybe there's the fundamental divide. Let me know in the comments what you think. Leave us a like, a subscribe, any of that stuff would be great.